I'd like to invite our speakers back up to the stage for our panel discussion. Again, Hunter Morrison, Michael Ford, Poncella Hardaway, and John Austin. Thank you. So I'm going to open our conversation with a question actually from the audience. It says, we've been aware of and reporting on the issues we've been discussing this evening since the 1960s. Regional collaboration is already allowed by the Michigan Constitution. So how do we break the stranglehold of home rule in Michigan? And I think that's a good place to start. Anyone want to tackle that? And I think, John, I want to come to you first.
Just one thing people often don't appreciate is we were designed politically in this local government close to the people model, which made sense under Jeffersonian democracy, but doesn't make any sense today when we need regional solutions. But it's really hard to change politically. I mean, it's a heavy political lift to get two school districts to merge or to get two communities to come together. So that's almost impossible to do. You can spend all the political energy getting a little piece of that done. But we need to, and really, I mean, we are, given the racial politics of our communities, as you know, it is obscene that this region historically ran two separate transit systems. A suburban one in the city, when the suburban one closed its doors at Alter Road. You know, that is, we've got a long way to go to change that reality. But the fact that there is more momentum, there's more understanding of the importance for the economy, but I think there's more understanding of the shared politics. And as Poncella said, we have to nurture that very purposefully. We have to find everything we do, ways we work together, black and white, across these boundaries, to put in place a new reality. But it's really, it's taking it piece by piece and figuring out how can we agree on a win-win regional solution, which, as you know, is so tough in this context.
Hunter, I'm sure you came up against some of these challenges in your work in Ohio. Were there things that worked particularly well in helping to break down some of these boundaries between communities?
Well, we have the same home rule structure. We're all part of the original Northwest Territory, which Jefferson set up as a sort of precursor, as sort of a third nation. But it really was built on local government, on townships, and taking local responsibility. And you can flip that around and say that's exactly the point. It is the responsibility of local governments, those elected officials, to balance their budget and deliver services. One of the interesting things that's been happening in Ohio, particularly in the aftermath of Governor Kasich and the legislature cutting out something called the Local Government Fund, which was a local transfer of monies from the state to the local government that dates back to the 1930s. It was part of a mega deal between local government and the state to pass state sales tax. And local governments relied on that. Well, in the absence of that, poverty forces people to figure out new solutions. And what we're seeing in increasingly large numbers is communities coming together to figure out how to make ends meet. Because again, they're required to balance their budgets. What we're seeing, particularly in Cuyahoga County over the last 5 years, is an effort led by the county government to encourage that to happen. Number one, all 58 communities in Cuyahoga County have signed a non-poaching agreement. Now that's not tax-based sharing, but that is stopping stealing from each other. That's important. Number two, they've set up an office of regional competitiveness that is working with individual communities and groupings of communities to try to figure out how to deal with things like sharing police departments, sharing fire departments, sharing 911. Those are not easy decisions. They often run into union issues. They run into political issues. But the fact of the matter is, across Northeast Ohio, the language of separation is being replaced by a language of cooperation, for no other reason than fiscal necessity. So it suggests that's one of the avenues. The other is, and it's partly generational, We've been looking for the last hour at a map of Michigan and a bit of Ohio and a bit of Indiana and Illinois with no lines on it. Google Earth is a profound tool because it causes you to look at realities on the ground without the lines. And there's a whole generation that's coming up, and is entering into the public policy field and the political field where those lines are less and less important. And it's easier to have the mental map. Our mental maps are changing. And as our mental maps change, our perception of what the other is changes. And so long-term, there's that. Short-term, you got to balance your budget.
Michael Ford, one of our attendees, says, everyone in this room likely agrees with the need for shared regional investment in quality regional transit, but how do we engage and persuade people from the outer suburbs to care about transit for the region?
Well, I think you have to talk about what's important. I've talked to a lot of the suburbs, and what I'm hearing is, the business case, the jobs, the economic development, the things that will happen to help their communities. Their communities are also thinking about what's going to happen to us in the next 5 to 10 years. And if we're not addressing the needs, then things are going to continue to get worse or not get better. And I think having those kind of discussions, bringing the business case, the economic case, this is a political issue, it's a social issue, there are many different layers to this, but I think it's talking to people about the cold hard facts and being able to speak to them directly. And I think once you understand how transportation is that connector that can bring economic development, raise your property values, bring opportunities for businesses to come in or retain folks in the area so they don't go somewhere else, I think that starts to resonate for people. And I think those are the kind of conversations that we're having. Transportation is not one size fits all. If you're in a bedroom community, there's a different way you might want to purpose that transportation. So it's being respectful or understanding of what the different needs are in those different communities.
We've been hearing a lot over the course of these conversations about the need to engage the community. And one of the things that I always wonder about is that connector between engagement and actual implementation, then accountability. Because if you engage people, the expectation or the hope is that that will result in actual, a plan that reflects what the community actually wants. Ponzella, can you talk a little bit about how to bridge that gap between just conversation and moving that into implementation?
Well, part of engagement, people define it in so many different ways. And what I see as real engagement is not just coming in, and people, give their comments, but how do we really, before even any initial plans are even drawn, that people actually have some idea of how, number one, processes are done in terms of planning, transportation, et cetera, that they can actually be equipped and actually build their capacity in understanding the way, the structures of how they're created, that they can actually weigh in based on that so that we're not opposers to any plan, but we actually understand the process and we actually give the engagement based on what we understand is happening. Bridging the gap in terms of implementation is, the other piece is how do we get people to actually, when we talk about these different tables or authorities or community advisory, all these kind of tables that are here deciding that it's authentic implementation, that people are actually a part of those tables, diverse populations, the users, let's say the end users of transportation, how are they actually at the table shaping and designing the services that they are going to be using on a regular basis, as well as those who want to use it for entertainment and other things. So how do we, I think sometimes we're afraid to actually take the time to really look at real engagement because we're in a hurry to actually change and do policy so quickly that we don't look at what is it going to take to get total buy-in from everyone so they can be successful for all people who actually have access to that particular policy or change that we're talking about.
And Hunter, actually, Michael, go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment. I mean, this doesn't resolve the transportation problem by any means, but we recently, had some discussions with DDOT and SMART about trying to increase the level of service. It doesn't address everything, but we reached an agreement where we're going to use $2.8 million per year to look at different areas within the corridors to advance transportation opportunities. I look at that as a gateway or a catalyst for more change. There's a lot of political will around that table to make something happen and to address the need out there. We can sit here in this room and talk all day, but what's happening to the people out there that need the service? Where's our focus? That's one reason why we're in existence. But I would say that it took a cooperation of a lot of folks understanding, and there's trust relation issues, there's no doubt about that. But I look at that as one sign. Again, I'm not trying to say that resolves a lot, but when you got to start with something, I think that's one point. This regional plan that we're trying to get done by this end of the year, and the millage coming in November of 16 will be, I think, a major game change if we can get that done, because it really will speak to the needs. Not everything's going to come at once, but I think in terms of bridging the gap and providing the opportunities for people to intermingle and get the services they need so they can get to the jobs where people can't get to right now is going to be an issue. And for the elderly and disabled, or for the millennials, there's just so many different avenues that transportation touches. So I just would bring that up as one example.
Hunter, how did you work to bridge that
One of the
gap?
problems any engagement process or planning process has is that people get cynical because, well, we spent all this time in the meetings and nothing's happening. And you get the language, well, all you do is plan and it sits on a shelf. One of the things we're trying to do across Northeast Ohio is really report on a quarterly basis the things that are happening. Because what we're finding is the recommendations and the initiatives that are all in the document, go online, vibrantneo.org, the advertisement. But all those initiatives are being done by somebody somewhere. But it's a large area, and it's very easy not to know it's not happening in my backyard. Therefore, it must not be happening. So transparency, information flow, reinforcing, pointing out, people wanted X, it's happening over here. It should happen over there too, and in your area, but it's not happening. Building the credibility based on the small steps. When you have a victory, pointing that out. When there's a connection, making that obvious and transparent so that people don't get cynical that their voice isn't heard because they don't see it in the headline the next day.
John, one of our attendees asks, what is required for Southeast Michigan to pursue a fiscal and data-driven approach like Northeast Ohio? It seems in Southeast Michigan we have great big thoughts and visions, but seem to have a barrier for effective and an effective and successful regional approach.
I think you need some leadership for Poncella's statement. Political leadership is most helpful, and business community leadership that insists that, look, we have to do things a lot differently. And Hunter reminded me that it's not just a crisis can get you there. Pennsylvania has more municipalities than we do. They also have 40 or 50 communities that are basically in receivership and emergency management, as we have 7 or 8 with, and you can't emergency manage your way to rebuild communities. You can balance the budget, but you can't get to the investments in water and infrastructure we need to make. At some point there, maybe sooner here, we need a governor, we need the regional chambers, we need the business and civic leadership and political leadership to say, we have to redesign the way we finance municipalities. This is a huge project for Michigan and the other industrial states to say, we have to basically redo the model, because a core city that's, the wealth is left and the tax base is expended, can't raise more money for itself, and we need to regionalize the taxing base. I mean, someone has to lead that charge politically and say, this is important because we can't finance the transportation, we can't finance the water infrastructure, we can't finance police and fire and sewer unless we remake the municipal finance.
And where does that political leadership come from? Is it from within the region? Is it from Lansing, or where?
Well, it can come, if you elect a governor with this agenda, understands, look, helping Detroit go includes persuasively, and we're seeing a little bit of this from the governor, we have to reorient state resources to disproportionately support the core cities, including Detroit's reanimation, whether it's education or infrastructure. I mean, you've got to put more money into these places, and you have to re-scramble the way we raise money. The business leadership from this region needs to make the same argument. And they need to get behind more. They're for regional transportation, but they need to get behind more. We actually have to finance this and persuade the voters to support it and finance things in new ways that build the regional tax base, as this institution showed can be done. We need to have the leadership that comes local and statewide can certainly help to say, if you organize together, we'll reward you with disproportionate state resources to support your programs.
Hunter, in Ohio, how was Vibrant NEO empowered to do the work they did and to actually move into that implementation phase?
Well, it's not. The Vibrant NEO was put together by the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, which is an association, it's a nonprofit corporation that has as its members the 12 counties and 5 intergovernmental organizations. As I said, it does not have a power created by an external force such as the state legislature, and it wasn't set up that way. It was set up to provide the information and data and insights that particularly the intergovernmental organizations that make decisions about billions of dollars of investment in water infrastructure, road infrastructure, and the like, use to make those decisions better. It's also intended to provide advice to the communities as to how to change their zoning and how to move forward on their zoning and their land use regulations. Now, it includes partners such as the Urban Land Institute, which just recently had a conference in Cleveland about the institution of form-based codes in Cleveland, because we have a zoning code that dated from 1929. And while we were able in my tenure to get rid of various terms like coal gasification and boarding houses and homes for the feeble-minded, rather antiquated terms for dealing with conditions of life, we were not able to fully reform it. This is a way of aligning our zoning code with our future. That's something that has been inspired by the process. But again, when you're dealing with a home rule constituency and a home rule structure, you can either be bound by it or flip it on its ear and say, you are responsible at the local level for taking care of your people. How are you doing that? And that means reaching out to your neighbor and coming together on a transit system, do that. And if your business, if you make the case that you're regionally uncompetitive, competitive, if you don't, then maybe you make the case that this is an economic necessity for us to be competitive. And it is. And we understand that. But those are some of the things, connecting those around the enlightened self-interest.
Yes, Marcella.
So I think it's incumbent upon us as citizens to really take a look at our leadership, people who we vote for, and understanding, what are our values in terms of how we want to turn the region around or turn our cities around in connection to the region. And do those leaders line up with the things that we think need to happen? And are we going to question them? Are we going to hold them accountable? So I think we have to hold our public officials accountable. Even our business leaders, our faith leaders, how are we moving the conversation in a way that's powerful, that we can actually do change? It starts with us in the room.
Michael, you mentioned in your talk that you started in Portland, and so you saw the evolution of their system, but it sounds like that happened over a span of time. And there seems to be a sense of urgency in Michigan right now, in this region, to get this transit system up and running. But how hopeful are you that you'll be able to implement what you think needs to happen with the urgency that it seems to demand? Or are we really looking at something practically that's going to take more time than we might want?
Well, I think some portions are going to take time, but I think there are ways in which we can start moving some things off, the table. Putting more buses on the road, knowing where some of the vulnerabilities are. And it's not just about, retooling what we have. It's about innovation. It's about looking outside the box. And where are the emerging trends? What does the data tell you? What's needed in this community? Not just looking at the last 50 years of routes and just saying we're just going to re-engage there. It's really about how you want to change the mindset, the perspective, and hearing what people have to say. A plan, to me, has to be alive. It's not some static thing that sits on a shelf, but it's got to be engaged with the community. It's got to be vibrant. It's got to be always addressing the changing and the needs. And it's not just about getting you from point A to point B, in my mind. It's about the whole experience. So wayfinding, real-time information, clean shelters, heated shelters, everything that makes that experience work, safety, all these things come together as one, not that they're just separate things, but they're all part of that one. And I think there are opportunities. I mean, one thing about getting a plan together is you got to be able to deliver on it. In Ann Arbor, I'm happy to say that when we got the millage passed, when I was there in May of 14, they were able to implement service in August that year, and the following year, and the following year. So things do take time, but you look at what the needs are and how you can implement. If we're getting this plan moving forward, we're obviously looking at what we can do right away and other things that can take time, but those things that take time, what can we do incrementally during that time where it's, you know, infrastructural issues that need to be addressed to get some level of service there. So I think it's really a planning, but it's an operational issue. And I think those steps will be very, very clear in the plan of how we deliver.
Hunter, then John? Or Hunter, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that we discovered is that the market is shifting. And it's not just about millennials, and it's not just about people trapped in the inner city. It's also about aging baby boomers who want to stay in their home. It's the gray revolution. It's people who moved out into the suburbs and want to stay there. How do you serve that constituency? That's an emerging constituency that has not thought of itself necessarily as a transit-oriented constituency. But one of the most powerful things we heard around the region was from suburban manufacturers and other businesses who couldn't get employees. It's not just about people who can't get to work, it's that people in the more remote parts of the region who put their businesses out there, probably because it was close to where they lived, cannot get workers, production workers, to come out. Because they require a reliable car, and in February we have something called winter in Ohio. I think you have it up.
We have it here too.
And if you have a car that's not very reliable, you may just be staying at home that day, and that machine will be down. Yes, oh, that's true, yeah. But the point is, if we listen to each other, we hear many non-traditional markets that are emerging. And I think to your point, there are non-traditional, not fixed route, not just put buses on old streetcar lines, thinking about how do we meet these emerging needs? How do we offer more transportation choices? We found that across the region, loud and clear, in a region that, like yours, made a whole lot of money for a whole lot of years building parts for automobiles. So we're not a transit-oriented part of the world like Portland. We make automobiles like you do, but we're hearing more and more people say we want more choices.
John?
We have to add to our own understanding about how something like building out a regional multimodal transportation system does really matter to the economy and creating new jobs. In addition to what Hunter said, building out transportation encourages other development around the stops. That's actually the main benefit for a place like Detroit. But there's even a more powerful opportunity. Grand Rapids has business leaders in a community that not only are they doing art prize and all sorts of funky, exciting things for a stodgy old community, they have now committed as a community, business leaders at the front saying, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint and increase by double the share of people riding buses and reduce our carbon footprint, get them out of cars. We're going to reduce our water and energy use by half, and that's going to drive, and we're going to have all the LEED buildings, we're going to have energy efficient everything. And so they're leading and innovating in this new mobility, new transportation modes, new energy modes, clean water, and that's making them a community of the future, not the past, and a place that more people want to live, work, and play. And so we cannot be, Billy Ford has said clearly he wants Ford Motor to be not a car company, but a mobility company. He wants Southeast Michigan to be the Silicon Valley of new mobility. we won't get there if you don't build out all the systems and the IT connections that is the new mobility, and you're just focused on the car. You have to deploy the full multimodal transportation system to be the pioneer in all the systems that people around the world are deploying. So that's huge. There's trillions of dollars of global market for new mobility solutions, but it's mostly to do with the fact that more and more people don't want to use the car, and they need and want to travel by all these other modes. So we need to deploy them, or we won't be the Silicon Valley of mobility.
One of the things that communities can do relatively inexpensively is understand that bicycles are a mode of getting to and from work. It's not just recreational, and it's not just for people of an upper income. A whole lot of people today use bicycles. But communities like Detroit, communities like Cleveland were designed to handle only buses and automobiles and trucks. You can do a lot with creating sure rows and striping and changing the way you handle that, and that's a function of your Department of Transportation and your Metropolitan Planning Organization and your county engineers. And that you can work on. That's a very relatively inexpensive, very incremental process by which you go through and figure that out. That's part of your zoning as well. Those are things you can do today to open up the mobility options more broadly by seeing these as connected systems.
I think Michael wants to jump in, and then John.
Just a comment. Also, there's other things that we can be looking at, and we are, private-public partnerships. Uber, how does that work at the last mile? All these things coming together to move people. It's about mobility options. So it's not just, one, size fits all, but how do you integrate all these different opportunities to move people in a region?
John.
The communities around the world that are leading in this new mobility, they set goals and targets for shares of riders on transit, on bus, on bike, pedestrian, and in car, to up the shares that are not in the auto, to reduce their emissions, and they incent them, they price it differently. And I'm like, well, we could never do that in Michigan, set goals to get people out of cars, but they're doing it in Grand Rapids. I mean, that's Michigan, so if they can do it, we can do that in Southeast Michigan, and that's the way we can be the capital of the transportation business again.
Pansela, I want to come to you because you talked a bit about this in your talk, but we have plans. There are people who are clearly engaged in this process and have ideas about what we need to do in terms of shaping a regional vision. But how important is it to find a way to have discussions and resolution, if not reconciliation, around some of these historical issues around race and poverty in the state to ensure that as we're planting seeds for growth, those seeds are actually planted on fertile soil?
So that's the hard work.
Yeah.
Really having conversations so people can understand the connectivity, they can understand what are some of the solutions that need to occur. But it's also just understanding our neighbors, understanding, why we're in Detroit, why we're in the suburbs, what is our purpose, our values. And just one conversation at a time. I can't even make it any more simpler than that. We've as Moses, we've done a lot of, we've paired congregations, we've paired city congregations with suburban congregations to talk about race, to talk about policies. We use transportation as a way of showing how we build trust between city and suburb, working on issues together. And through that process, you begin to, your own biases begin to show, and how do we begin to take a look and talk about them and address them. But one thing, when we do hold anyone accountable, like a public official, we're clear why we're all in the room. We might have different ways of why we want transportation. It could be for various different reasons, but the issue is we all want transportation. So how do we find that common thread on any issue? We all want good housing. We all want to be able to retire in our communities. We all want safe neighborhoods. And so how do we make sure that we keep drawing those connections, that we all have more alike than different, and we kind of dispel those myths about the whole narrative that we've been taught and given to us over the years, and start changing how we're going to move forward, because this is a new day, a new age for us.
Is there an effort to have those conversations at the legislative level? Because so often they publicly frame these conversations for their constituents. And as Detroit was moving through its bankruptcy process, some of the language that was coming out of Lansing was very divisive. So is that an effort that's underway, or is that necessary from your perspective?
So I think, so many times we've actually invited public officials in the room. What's this 2013 time is gone. So we actually had a bankruptcy conference with John Powell and Wayne State, because we really wanted to bring all diverse partners in the room, including funders, business leaders, community people, social activists, to really have a conversation about the bankruptcy and beyond the bankruptcy. What are some of the solutions that we can begin to look forward? The bankruptcy is happening right now, but how do we begin to move forward in terms of solutions that we don't incur into this moving forward in terms of divisions, and actually holding people accountable in terms of just this whole, there's a trend. Municipal, I call it municipal predatory lending. It's happening across the country. Why is that? Is that a fight that we need to really be thinking about? And that's a pretty big concept to be thinking about. But there are some trends that are happening that starts from the federal level on down that we begin to need to raise and identify these strategies that are causing for our communities to be poor and unhealthy and dysfunctional. But we have to call it out, and we have to have people understand what's happening in the bigger picture in the scheme of things. Education is another one. We had a steering committee. We got a lot of controversy about it, but it had Republicans and Democrats, had business leaders, community people, teachers. That is a very diverse coalition trying to resolve the solution around education in the state of Michigan. Now, we got a long ways to go in really pushing our legislators about why it's important to move an agenda, and there's a huge fight about it, but the first step was getting into a room, struggling together about these different values and concepts, and really getting to an understanding, and some miraculous things happened in those conversations, and that's valuable and stuff that we can build on.
So as we wrap up for the evening, I just want to end with a question from one of our audience members, and John, we'll start with you. What are 3 action items that this group in this room can do when we leave here today to move things in the direction you think things need to go?
On a small note, keep looking for places to work together across the racial and community divide on tangible things. And even just coming here tonight, we see some of that. My son was working 2 summers here in Detroit, first at Focus Hope and then with the People's Platform, which some of you may know, and sort of gave me a window into some of the discourse of how do you support community-led efforts around land use and housing, and how do they meet all of the well-intentioned, do-gooding people trying to do stuff coming down. And so we've got to be sincere about finding those personal opportunities to create the common space where we work together on a project across these divides. Because as people, we can always figure out a way to work together and help each other. But it's so hard in this state to get past this, this balkanized, racially infected politics, where it's so hard for legislators right now to do what they should do for Detroit schools, to pay the bill that is the state's bill, because they historically have their constituents and they themselves don't think, we want to do another thing for Detroit? I don't want to do another thing for Detroit. So we need to keep finding ways to do it. And I would just work on, let's name these opportunities that are the future, whether it's, let's be the transportation center, let's be the community redevelopment and energy, water, and food systems. Let's find these things that we can work on together, and let's find the ways to do them in the way that is inclusive and it is coming together. And those are huge challenges, but that's our opportunity, is to leverage what we have to grow a next economy, but to do it in a way that ameliorates one of the big dysfunctions of the old economy, which is that it separated us black and white, and by income and by place.
Michael?
Get involved. Talk to your legislature. Talk to your local representatives. But also, we need to change the narrative of how we talk about this. I mean, this is about everybody in together. And I always ask the question, what happens if we do nothing? If we do nothing, we're going to get more of the same. We're not going to get any other place that we need to be, and things are just going to get worse, and there's not going to be the economic development, the jobs. There's a lot of things that are happening around here right now, but transportation is a key component to that. So I would encourage you to go to our website, rtamichigan.org. Get your friends involved. Let them know what's going on. Let your voice be heard locally and at the state level, and keep engaged. We're going to obviously have something to share and talk about, and we need your support. Even if you don't use the system, or you'll never use the system, you'll know somebody that will benefit from this. Your property values, jobs, opportunities, all stem from that. We're not just about transportation. I look at transportation as part of community. It is community, and we've got to think about it differently than we have before. And we as providers have to be innovative. We've got to make sure that our services are meeting your needs, the security, the safety, all the things that come into all that is our responsibility as well, but we've got to be listening to what you have to say too, and that's our commitment to making that happen.
Hunter.
One of the things you might do as a form of self-evaluation at a community level, and there's a term we developed in Vibrant Neo called quality connected places. You can ask yourself whether your community, which is maybe the place you live, maybe the place you work, maybe however you define your community and your sphere of influence, whether it's a quality connected place now and into the future for yourself, for your family, for your neighbors. I think that if you begin to ask those questions, how well are you connected? How well are your neighbors connected? It drives you towards that website. It drives you towards that discussion on transit. It drives you to looking at bike connections and pedestrian connections and safe walks to school and a whole lot of things that are going on around the country to make communities more connected. Connected to opportunities, connected to food, connected to nature, connected to each other. But the other question is what sort of quality of place? And what needs to change in your community to make it a more quality place? Now that's a qualitative judgment, but sites like AARP have been developed livability indexes. There's walk scores. There's all sorts of ways you can evaluate your community. Because people are evaluating your community to determine whether they want to come and live in your community, whether they want to be recruited to your community, whether they want to stay in your community. So why don't you do that with yourselves and your friends and your neighbors and ask, how well are we competing with each other? How well are we competing as a metro? How well are we competing as a part of the world? I would suggest that the Great Lakes states as a whole are not competing for the talent that's out there. But it starts, as it did in Grand Rapids, as it did in Portland. It started with a few people in Portland saying, we're not going to build the freeways. It started with a few people in Boston getting to the governor back in the 1970s. We're not going to do all these freeways. We're going to invest in transit. It starts with an enlightened constituency talking to the people they elect to do their will. That's Jeffersonian democracy. That's what we're based on. But it starts with that self-examination. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? What's it going to take to get there, and how we're going to work together to do that?
Pansela.
A lot's been said. You know, I really commend all of you who came out here tonight to inform yourselves about some of these issues, right? But there are so many people who are consumed with so many things in terms of just the way of living, you know, working, taking care of their children. They don't have the time to really inform themselves about some of these things that are going to impact their lives down the road. Structurally, there's a number of things that are going to be probably happening in 2016. The election is coming up. We're going to find a bunch of stuff on the ballot, right? A lot of things. And some things we need to make sure we're informed about because it has huge impacts on our quality of life. But how do we begin to engage and to start having the conversation? So one of the things that I think is helpful, and we've done this in the past, you know, maybe, you know, having a house meeting. You know, you have some friends over and talk to them about some key issues, invite people, and just have a casual conversation. I forget what they call it, but like if people hear things 7 times, it begins to connect, right? And so I think again, it starts with us. And I think it's so important for each of you, even today, if each of you commit to having 2 house conversations over the next like 6 months about some of these key issues. One, it helps you to get a deeper understanding of some of the things that are impacting us, that are deeply impacting us as we move forward. And 2, we have to act on those things and some elections that are coming up next year. Taking a close look at leadership. Who is aligned with the things that we think that needs to happen in our region? Can we give them a litmus test? in terms of them running and hold them accountable. So I think the simplest thing that you can do is just have conversation, even just organizing. Some of your friends, I have friends, I can talk to them about the RTA, they have no clue what I'm talking about. I have to keep telling them, it's this thing that's gonna go on the ballot next year, and it's about you getting on a bus so you can get to school, right? And so it's just kind of, trying to keep having that conversation and keep doing it, and that's the hard work. We wanna throw policy out there, and a few people get it, and 5 people vote on it, and it's done. But we want to change the way democracy is done, where there are voices who are more informed, but we are the ones that are going to help create that cultivation and discipleship and move people in terms of how they turn and get actively engaged once again in democracy. And just a simple conversation, right? Talking about, here's why we got to go to the polls in November. Something simple as that.
Pansela Hardaway, Hunter Morrison, Michael Ford, John Austin, thank you all for lending your voices this evening. And now to wrap things up, Katie Locker.
Good evening. I'm Katie Locker, and I'm the program director for the Knight Foundation. And the Knight Foundation sponsored the last 6 conversations that Detroit Future City has hosted as this Ideas for Innovation. And this conversation this evening was a perfect way to wrap up and to remind me why we made that investment. Our mission at the Knight Foundation is informed and engaged communities. And our panel this evening absolutely talked to us about we need to have that information, we need to share it across our community, and then we need to do something with it. And so I'm just delighted that over the last several months, these 6 conversations have taken place. Over 800 people have participated in these conversations. I know there's some people in the audience who've attended more than one. Will you raise your hand if you've attended more than one? It's a wonderful thing. So I'm also, the roots of the Knight Foundation are in journalism. The Knight Ridder newspapers were founded by the Knight brothers. And so part of what they believed in is that informed and engaged communities led to robust democracy. And they really led that through their journalism. So the wonderful thing about what Detroit Future City has done with this program is that there are publications that result from it, and also the amazing partnership that's gone on with Michigan Radio. Thank you, Jen, so much. That has allowed a lot of people who weren't able to be at these sessions to hear the conversations on the radio, to read about them online, and then to view these publications. So I'm so thankful we were able to be involved. I'm particularly thankful to Dan and Victoria and the Detroit Future City team for making it all happen. And I thank you all for being willing to engage as you have in these conversations. And certainly thank you to our panel tonight. And we have a reception in the Kresge Court just outside the doors, and someone will point you the way, but we hope you can stay around and talk some more with folks. Thank you.